All right, I've got my Samurai in the shop. I'm trying to do a dune trip here in a couple weeks, and I want to do a little more suspension tuning. The rear is a little harsh in the upper parts of the travel. I'm getting close to bottoming out. And so it's got a dual rate setup. And so you've got two different springs stacked on top of each other. And then, there we are. So you've got this nut that adjusts your spring preload and ride height. And then this little internal nut is what this plastic divider hits. So as you go through the wheel travel, both these springs compress at the same time. Then at a certain point, this plastic spring divider will hit this secondary nut, it's called, and that will lock this spring out, and then now all the work is being done by the lower spring. So when you stack two springs, the math is a little complicated to explain quickly, but basically if you stack two springs, the combined spring rate is less than either one of them by themselves. And so then when you take this spring out of the equation and just run on this lower spring, your spring rate increases. So the idea is to ramp up the spring rate as you approach the bump stops to slow down the bottom out. And so you can basically make it ride really soft and plush. You know, but if it was that way all the time, it would go through all of the travel very easily and hit the bump stops more than you want. So that's kind of the idea with this, is to, you know, your spring rate's going up a graph, and then you get close to the bump stops, you want to go up so the springs can resist the movement and keep you from having a big harsh bottom out. So the way this is set up now, that crossover point is too abrupt. It almost never bottoms out. I mean, I can hit things hard. It rides really cush, you know, in smaller bumps. But when you are getting in the whoops, or that's mostly where I notice is in the whoops, like jump landings and things like that, it's not a big deal. But I feel like in the whoops, that spring rate is ramping up too much, and it's not letting the wheels move enough to keep the tires on the ground through the whoops. So I think I've got it's probably covered in mud because I haven't washed this. It is. So right under here, I use a Sharpie and I kind of write down where I'm at. I also keep a notepad, but I'm pretty good at forgetting that notepad at home when I take this thing out. So this is my second, but once I get these off and apart, I'll look at these closer. I believe this is a 150 and this is a 225 off of memory. I've got to go through my box of springs. I might go a hair stiffer with this one if I have one. I'm not sure that I do, but I'm definitely going to change this to a slightly softer one. If my total spring rate went down a little, I would be happy with that as well, because I feel like the combined rate maybe is a hair stiff too. There's a really good video that Wayne Israelson put out. He doesn't seem to be making videos anymore, but his YouTube channel is called Wayne's Way. And he's got a really good video. I think it was his first video on going through and figuring out what you want your spring rates to be. And so I'm kind of using his information to figure this out. But so to start with, this is ride height, driver passenger side. I measured what my springs are. So this is my total height. This is the two springs individually. Same thing for the right side. And now I'm going to do the same measurements with the Samurai picked up by the frame, so that the wheels are hanging, and that will, then I'll know if I have any how much preload I have. So how much I'm squeezing the springs before I even put the weight of the car on it. And in the rear, a good starting point is about 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches of spring preload. So I have no idea where I'm at right now with that. So I want to jack this up and check it. And then that'll kind of help me confirm or change my idea on my spring rates. From memory though, in the beginning, my first King of Hammers race and the second, I did not have a front sway bar. And so this thing had a huge amount of body roll. And to fight that, I went with basically the stiffest springs I could put on it and keeping the right height that I wanted. You know, because if you go too stiff of springs, it's just going to sit high and you're not going to be able to adjust that out. So to kind of get more in depth with that, I basically ran the stiffest springs I could that I had basically 0 preload, but the springs were not loose when the shocks were fully extended. So it was this, you know, the stiffest it could be while keeping the springs tight. It actually, like, it rode pretty good, but it can definitely be softer. And since then, I've added a front sway bar, and I really never changed the springs. I mean, overall, I like it, how it is, other than I just feel like in the whoops, the rear could do a little better. It could, you know, if your springs are too stiff, you know, the position of a spring is based on the load it's being applied to it. And so this, you know, a whoop going through the whoops puts a big load, no load, big load, no load. And if you have a really stiff spring, you know, the difference between fully loaded and no load, you know, your suspension moves a certain amount. The softer the springs are, the more the spring is going to respond to that load because it's softer, so it squishes more. And that's just one piece of it. You know, the shock tuning has got just as much, if not more, to do with it. But before you can really dial the shocks, you need the spring rates to be right. So that's what I'm doing today. I just want to try to fine tune the spring rate a little bit. You know, I have a limited number of springs. I've got a tote with probably 3 or 4 sets of springs in it that I bought over the last couple of years. So that's kind of a rough, quick thing, but like I said, if you check out on the YouTube channel Wayne's Way, one of his first videos, he gives a really good explanation of how to figure out your springs. And you know, I get a lot of people that ask me, like, what's your spring rates? What's your spring rates? Like, I try not to even tell them, because every vehicle, for every circumstance, you know, is going to need a different kind of spring. You know, if you're trying to copy my setup, but you want to be a rock crawler, you're probably going to be too stiff. You know, this thing isn't really built for rocks. It does pretty good in the rocks, but my main criteria for my suspension in this thing is going fast. So hitting the whoops, landing from jumps, you know, trying to get around corners as quick as I can, that kind of stuff. How it performs in the rocks is a completely secondary importance to me. So I'm gonna get this jacked up and check out these measurements. Okay, here it is sitting at full droop. Get the tires off the ground. So then I went through and did all the measurements again. And so you can see both sides, they're almost the same. Oops, it's supposed to be an 11, but the little springs, are really about a 1/16 of an inch difference. This was really closer to 5/16, but I kind of go to the closest 1/8. But in the beginning numbers, you can see my preload's a little different side to side. It's like a 1/16 of an inch difference. Not that big of a deal. The car sat pretty level, but I've never really gone crazy measuring to make sure. So when I do the changes, I'll probably try to get them a little more even. A lot of times there is just one person in here, but I'll probably make it just symmetrical. With my setup, that's another thing too with your spring rates. In my case, I have 14-inch travel shocks, and this thing is built to sit basically in the center of that travel. A lot of time rock crawlers, they want theirs to have more droop and less up travel. Mine is basically 50-50. So, asking what my spring rates are won't do you any good if you've got a different weight, different ride height, different use case, all that stuff. So it's really a very individual vehicle kind of thing. So, back to the numbers. So my springs are, the top spring is got a 12-inch free length, and the bottom has got a 16-inch free length. So the total would be 28 plus the thickness of that secondary adjuster, which I need to measure. But it looks like I've only got that spacer's about a 1/4 inch thick. So I've only got about 3/4 of an inch of preload. And so that's a little stiff. Like I said, you want a starting point in desert, and again, these preload numbers is kind of for, desert race style suspension setups. And so you want about about 1 inch of front preload and about 2 inches of rear preload is kind of your starting point ballpark numbers you shoot for. So knowing what I've got in those numbers, I can do some math and figure out what this will give me, but these are the springs I have, so I'm just going to put them in and see what it does. If I was ordering brand new springs, I would sit down and do the math and figure out which ones would give me the proper preload. And again, usually springs are sold in about 25, depending on the size and whatever. But like these ones are sold in 25-pound increments. So, at some point too, you're going to be, it's hard to get it perfect because you've got a lot of things to deal with that are limited. So the next thing is I've got to bring this back to the ground, compress the suspension just a little, pull my limit straps off, and then I can loosen the shock bolts. Actually, with my car, it's pretty convenient. I can, to do a spring change, I can just pull my lower spring bolt, and then the shock will swing to the side out of the bracket and can just hang straight down, and I'm able to get the springs off and put them back on. So then I don't have to deal with, dismounting the reservoir and the top mount and all that. I just have one bolt to deal with. That was kind of a happy accident in this design, I guess. I didn't plan for that, but it did work out good. These shocks have a little more than an ideal amount of tilt forward, but with this giant fuel cell I got in here, 22 gallons, to get good structure, it was easier to use the back wall as kind of my main structure. And also I did a lot of playing around with my link length and these angles. And I do get a little bit of progression just through this geometry in those angles. And also was able to yield a little more total wheel travel than the 14-inch shock by itself. I think I got like 16 and a half, but that's a whole different story. So I'm gonna get these popped off and cleaned up. This is my semi-sketchy jack setup. This is the only way I can get the tires off the ground other than using a high lift. It's a little more stable than a high lift, but I would, you know, I don't go under the car with this by itself. I use my big jack stands. I've got these big jack stands I built. They go up to about 3 feet. So anyway, I'm gonna get these bottom shock bolts pulled out and slide some new springs on. Okay, you can see I got the shock loose from the bottom. I pulled this wheel off just to make life a little easier, but it can actually be done with the wheels on. So I got the bottom free. So since these shocks do have a little preload, can't get this spring seat off. So I've got to loosen up this upper collar and run it up to where the springs are loose. These are FOA shocks, is the brand. They are definitely cheaper than Fox or King. The quality is not as good, but when I bought these, they were about half of the cost, and they're definitely more than half the value. You know, I think they're a really pretty good bang for the buck. I've been pretty rough on them, and they're holding up pretty good. I have had the one on that side, I've had some leak issues with. It got damaged in a rollover once, but you can buy every individual piece, and the pieces are cheap. I've been happy with them. And one thing I really like is they use this pinch style upper spring seat. Some of them use a nut and then like a jam nut, and those are a pain. These are easy. You loosen that Allen nut, and most of the time there's these like holes you can put like a punch in to get leverage to turn them, but it's pretty rare. I don't know that I've ever actually had to do that. Way easier. I'm just gonna run this up about a 1/2 inch. So now you can see that it takes about a good 1/2 inch gap or so. Not sure if I can do this with one hand, but maybe a little more. Yeah, I need 2 hands. Okay, got the springs off. So this is the lower spring seat. See, it's got this cut out. So it basically just sits on there. And the way this is made, it needs to have pressure on it, even at full droop, because these can fall out otherwise. So if you run stiff springs, and when you fully droop your rig, if this is loose, then you need limit straps to limit how far the shock can extend. I feel pretty bad. This poor thing got used pretty hard over the last couple of Hoop DX races, and didn't get washed after the last one. It's pretty nasty. So once I get this all done, I'm gonna bring it out and wash it. This is all full of dirt. This needs to be cleaned up because this divider, actually, you can hear that, rubs on the shock, and then that's when your upper spring gets locked out. And this is adjustable up and down, so you can control that point when it happens. Most people call that the crossover point. So that's when you'd go from your combined rate of the 2 springs stacked up to just the lower. So this is a 150-pound spring. I feel like this is a little light, and I'm gonna dig in my box and see if I have anything. I think at one point I had some 175s, but they might be on the front right now. Not sure, but this is a 225, and I'm gonna go to this one. This one's a 175. So that'll bring down my combined rate, and that, you know, that kind of, if you were to graph this out, that difference when you go to the crossover hopefully will be less extreme. So I'm gonna get this cleaned up and stick these together. I'll probably, I'll jot down the formula for figuring out your spring rates. It's actually pretty easy. But I'll show that here in a minute once I get these put on. Okay, so I got the springs on. I took a piece of Scotch-Brite and just kind of used, the dirt was really stuck on the shock body, so I scrubbed that clean, scrubbed out the inside of the spring divider. So now I got the springs on, and I basically ran this down until it just kind of, you know, there's no play, but it's not really crushing down the springs. So now I'm going to take a measurement of this, and this will be my, you know, my zero preload number from the top of the spring seat to where the black meets the silver. It's just a nice, easy place to measure. So I want to, I'm just going to put the weight, you know, put the shock back on, do the other side, put the weight on the car, you know, set it back down on its tires, see what my ride height looks like, and then, you know, as I play with this to get the ride height right, then I will know based on that number I just got, you know, how much preload I'm putting into it. And again, for me right now, it may or may not be perfect because this is just what I have. But in going through this, I'll know, like, if they're way off, it'll give me a better idea what to order. I use, these are Viper brand springs. And again, they're not the top brand by any means, but I have had good luck with these. I have not had a single one sag or settle. You know, I set my ride height where I want it, and it just stays there. I've been really impressed with these guys. Definitely cheaper than iBox or something like that. So, you know, I'm not a millionaire. This whole thing is built on a pretty tight budget. You know, that's part of why I build every single thing on it, because, you know, one, I enjoy it, but two, I don't have the money to pay people to do things for me. So, you know, I definitely try to find the best value in things I can. You know, there's some areas where you just gotta buy the best, but you know, there's always places where you can hunt for the best values. I try not to cut corners, but you know, you got to keep this hobby in check somehow. So I'm gonna basically just repeat what I did here on the other side off camera. There's no sense in showing you things twice. And then once I get the wheels on and set on the ground, I'll come back and show you what the ride height looks like and what I've got to do to fix it. One more measurement I made in my, you know, before setup is I measured the gap to the crossover nut. You know, from the bottom of that nut to the top of the plastic, right there. So I kind of played around with the jack, and I got this measurement back to my original number, you know, with the original spring still, because I forgot to measure that initially. It's not super important, but that just, you know, with this spring being changed, the seat will be changed. This is going to come down, and so this, you know, the weight of the car is still going to squish this spring the same amount, but it's just going to be moved down because this spring is going to get squished more. So that would increase that gap. I feel like this gap was too tight anyway, but still just having that number I'll know kind of where to play with it. I probably won't even touch that secondary nut. I'll just let it stay there and let that gap get bigger. But now I know, based on my notes, when I go out, if it's bottoming too easily, it kind of give me a reference of kind of where to go back to and where to play with in that range. So, you know, in playing with shocks, notes are very important. And I kind of feel like the last time I went out, I wish I would have played with this placement. I wish I would have taken that up, but I feel like I'm squeezing these springs pretty far already. So you imagine all these gaps. If you take 1.5 inches out, that's getting pretty compressed. Like I said, I kind of wish I had a set of slightly stiffer uppers. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I probably will readjust these spring seats to keep that 1.5 inches, but I'm not sure yet. But at least now I have that information, so I can make that choice. Okay, so that's it sitting on its own weight with 0 spring preload. And unfortunately, I can't really get far enough away, but it's definitely sitting low in the back. And kind of an easy indicator is these arms are designed to be level with the frame at right height. So you can see it's about 2 inches low. So now I'm gonna jack it up to take the weight off. You know, you could do it with the weight on, but it makes them really hard to turn. So I'm gonna jack it up, take the weight off the suspension and spin these down. And I'll probably go 2 inches. This is not a direct 1-to-1, but it's pretty close. But so then I'll jack it up, and it'll take a little bit of trial and error to get it right. Definitely softer just by pushing on it. It's definitely softer. All right, so I'm gonna jack it up again and turn those nuts down and see how it sits. And then again, like I said before, with knowing this measurement now, I'll know how much preload I put into the springs once I'm at the right height. Okay, so when I started with my 0 preload number was 2 1/4. Just as a starting, I just went to 4 inches. So that'd be 1 3/4 inches. And it's level. So I'm gonna start with that. So that tells me I've got 1 3/4 inches of preload. So maybe just a hair on the stiff side of the 2 inch kind of ballpark. But again, a 25-pound increment might be too much. And for me, and the way I use this, I probably would rather err on the stiff side, because I'm not going, you know, I hit jumps and whoops and, you know, hit things hard and fast with this thing, so I don't want to be too soft. But I'm gonna go ahead and lock things down, and I'm gonna kind of jot down the math for the spring rates, figuring the spring rates out. But it's looking good. Right now, I don't know if you noticed when I had the wheels off, I've got some 1.5 inch wheel spacers on it right now. They're not permanent. I just was trying. Unfortunately, I didn't get to try them. The last Hoopty Cross race in my area got canceled. But if you see the video, the Hoopty Cross Albany video, I had a lot of bicycling moments in this thing. So I had bought the wheel spacers. Man, I'm out of breath from turning those nuts. I bought the wheel spacers and basically a full set of springs, just the lowers, 2 inches shorter. And I bought them in this rate, what these long ones are, hoping that that would be right. But my quick thought process was, I like how it handles. I just wanted to sit lower, so keeping the spring rates the same. It would just sit 2 inches lower, and then I also 2-inch shorter straps, because if I didn't, when the shock fully extended, the springs would be loose and that lower retainer could fall out. So that was kind of my short course setup I was going to try. And then I also have a set of, what size are they? These are 33 1050s. I'd like to find a set of 31s. But I have a set of tires and wheels on my little black Samurai project I'm working on, and I was just going to kind of borrow those for the race and see how I did. Because I want to get this thing to sit down low for that kind of racing so I can really slide around corners more safely. Because the handling's pretty good, other than it's tippy. It's real responsive. The back end comes around easy. So it's really fun. It's just you can't push it without it tipping up. In that kind of driving. In the sand dunes and stuff like that, it's plenty stable. Well, especially in the dunes, it's basically this width in the dunes because I have 15 by 10 wheels for my sand tires, and so it widens it out 2 inches per side. So, looking forward to how it works. Like I said, I'm going to jot down that math and show you so you can kind of see the difference that this makes. All right, so I got the spring collars cinched down, and I actually turned them up 2 more turns, less preload. Even though that level showed level, it measured out just a touch high in the back, so I brought it down about 1/4 inch. Unfortunately, I don't know how much gas is in this thing. I wish I had a gauge. That makes a bit of a difference. That's a lot of weight when that's full. But normally I don't run it full. Just in King of the Hammers, I make sure it's full so I get my full range. So I'm pretty happy with how it's sitting. So here's the quick little formula for figuring out what your spring rates are with a dual rate setup. So you take your top spring rate, multiply it by your bottom spring rate, and then you divide that answer by the top plus the bottom. So in this setup, this is before, so this is with the old bottom spring. So 150 times 225 divided by 150 plus 225. And so you get 33,750 for the top answer and 375 for the bottom answer. And then you divide this by this, and so that comes out to basically 90 pounds per inch. So if you're not aware how that works, springs are rated in pounds per inch in America. So for every pound of weight, for every 90 pounds of weight that's on the back of this thing, that stack will compress 1 inch. And so that kind of comes back to how I was explaining springs respond, their length responds to the amount of load that they're supporting. And so going over rough terrain, say you compare a Cadillac to a 1-ton truck. Well, Cadillacs have really soft springs, and so when you hit a lump, that causes more load on that wheel, so that wheel easily moves up to absorb it. And then a 1-ton truck is made to hold a lot of weight, so the springs are stiff. So when you hit that same size bump, that spring is not going to compress as much. That way, so then the whole body goes up with the bump instead of just the suspension. So the softer the springs are, the more the wheels will respond to bumps without shoving the whole body up. So to get softer ride, these are real general loose guidelines, obviously. There's a million factors, but you know, you're never gonna get a lightweight rig to eat bumps if you've got super stiff springs. It's just what it is. So I did the same math after the change, and so I dropped from 90 pounds to 80 pounds. And I haven't done the math, but I mean, that's almost 10% off of the spring rate, or 10% softer. So, you know, I have no idea if that's enough or what that's going to do, but it's got to be a step in the right direction. So I'm going to give that a try. Like I said, I haven't adjusted these secondary lockout nuts yet. What I'm probably going to do is leave them up high and just go run around a little bit and see how it feels. Actually, I dug through my box of springs and I have one step softer as well. And so I'm going to bring those with me on my trip. But I'm going to run it, see if it bottoms easily, and then you start bringing this down to contact this sooner. Right, you know, where it's sitting right now, it'll probably never, I don't think it could hit. But that's kind of a nice little tuning feature, like I kind of explained before, to help stop bottoming. I think that's it. So I've done this quite a bit. And so what's happened is this is my box of springs that I've got now. Like I said, 4 of these are just like my short course springs. But I've got a whole bucket of springs now. You know, things change. Like I kind of talked about before, you know, with the handling and the really loose body roll this thing initially had. I just had to go stiffer. I think I've got to go through my notes. I'm not sure what the front's sitting at. It's also a little stiff, but I haven't, you know, one thing at a time. The front going through the whips hard wasn't a problem. It was the back. So you don't want to make too many changes at a time. Really, one change at a time is the best. So you can see if you do too many things, you're not really going to know which one made it better or worse. Once I get this back to where I'm really happy with it, then what I'm probably going to do is do some more shock tuning. These shocks got quite a few miles on them right now since the last time I've had them apart, and it'd be good to go through them, just check things out. And depending on how this feels, I may do a valving change as well. I want the back to be really free, to where when you're going through whoops, basically the body sits still and just the wheels in and out of the whoops. And then the front a little firmer, so the front kind of stays high and kisses like the top 25% of the whoops. But we'll see. Let's see how it does. I need to get some good video. You know, seat of the pants is so you can only do so much. You really need to see it from the outside. So I'll probably have somebody else drive it, have them video me driving it, and then maybe have someone else drive it. You know, find a section that's, you know, kind of the limit of what it can handle at full speed, and see what it's doing. Because honestly, it can be really hard to tell, at least for me, because I'm not super skilled in this shock tuning stuff. I'm still learning a lot. Sometimes it's hard to tell, like, am I bottoming or am I just too stiff? You know, that can be tough to tell sometimes, especially if you have really nice bump stops where it's not, you know, a hard, you know, sudden abrupt bottom out. The bump stops, if you noticed on these shocks, are pretty tall and really squishy, and they have a very like progressive feel, and you really almost never get a hard thunk when it bottoms out, which is really nice. But So hopefully this helps people out if you're playing with coilovers. And another thing, like, you know, this 80 pounds per inch, or even the 90 I was at before. Off the top of my head, a YJ leaf, I think, is in the 150-ish pound range, maybe even a little more. I have all this stuff written down somewhere. But you almost can't get leaf springs this soft. That's why I hate leaf springs. If you're, you know, YJs work pretty good in comparison to stock because they're much softer than the stock springs. But to get something to really ride nice, that's this light, leaf springs just aren't going to do it. And then, you know, once you buy a leaf spring, it is what it is. You know, you can pull a leaf here or there, but that's pretty bad on the life of the springs. And having coilovers, you just have a million options. You know, then this crossover point tunability is really cool. So anytime I talk to people about doing new suspension, I always recommend just saving up, biting the bullet, and just going coilovers. Far superior. So that wraps this up. I have just a couple little maintenance items that I got to go over on this thing. Need to wash it, and I've got a small power steering leak. A couple other little things I need to do for this dune trip. And then this is going to be the last trip of the year for this car. And next thing on the list is getting this put in there. So I'm going to be pulling motors and swapping, getting this one stuck in it. I'm pretty excited. That's been a project for far too long. I need to get that in there. So I'm looking forward to having fun with this thing and then getting it set up better for next year. So thanks for watching. If you like this stuff, give me a like if you could. And we'll see you on the next video.